Greetings, everybody. Peter Maravellis here on behalf of City Lights booksellers and publishers and the City Lights Foundation. I'd like to welcome you to City Lights Live, our virtual reading series that follows in the footsteps of our in-store calendar. We continue to feature the works of authors we know and love through readings, discussions, and forums moving into the summer season. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. We'd like to take this moment to acknowledge those who have come before us as stewards of the land and give an offering of respect. Tonight, City Lights, in conjunction with Graywolf Press, present Lars Horn in conversation with Carolina De Robertis, celebrating the publication of Voice of the Fish, a lyric essay by Lars Horn, published by Graywolf Press. Voice of the Fish is the latest Graywolf Press Nonfiction Prize winner. It is an evocative, very, very compelling essay collection that explores the trans experience through themes of water, fish, and in the light of mythology. Lars Horn was educated at the University of Edinburgh, the L'École Normale Supérieure in Paris, and Concordia University in Montreal. Lars Horn's work has appeared in the Kenyon Review, Right Across Canada, and New Writing Scotland. They make their home in Miami, Florida, but soon to be Colorado. Joining Lars tonight is Carolina De Robertis. Carolina De Robertis is the author of 5 novels, including The President and the Frog, a finalist for the Penn Faulkner Award and the Penn Gene Stein Book Award, and Cantoras, winner of the Stonewall Book Award and finalist for a Lambda Literary Award. Their books have been translated into 17 languages. They're also an award-winning translator of Latin American literature and a recipient of numerous honors for their work. As a current Baldwin Emerson Fellow, they're gathering oral histories of queer and trans BIPOC elders of the West Coast. They teach in the San Francisco State University and live in Oakland. Please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Lars Horn and Carolina De Robertis. Such an honor and a pleasure to have you both. Welcome to City Lights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter. Hello, Lars.
Hello.
It is so absolutely fantastic to see you here. I have been so excited for this event, and I mean, just supremely and profoundly and immensely enjoying my swim through this book, Voice of the Fish. Thank you so much for writing it. I have so much appreciation for it, and I will get into it as we talk. I also have so many questions, a fraction of which I think I'll have the opportunity to ask you today. But really, thank you so much for giving us this exquisite, incredible, and really important journey. And I think maybe we've talked about maybe starting with you reading to us from the book, and then we can chat about it. And then at the end, for about 15 minutes, we'll take questions from the audience. So folks who are here, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, City Lights, you're amazing. Support indie bookstores. And folks who joined us, if you have questions percolating, keep them in mind. There'll be time to drop them in the chat later on and bring them forward to Lars. Okay, so Lars, how does that sound? Should we get to hear?
Sounds wonderful. Yeah, I likewise just want to second thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to you, Carolina. Thank you, City Lights. And as I was just saying, before the event got started, I'd planned a much longer reading about modeling for my mother's art installations with busts of dead squid and how that related to my queer body and queer family. But from the readings of the past book tour and coming back to altitude, my voice, I'm really losing it. So I'm going to apologize now. I'm going to do a very short reading of just a couple of pages from one of the vignettes that go through the book, that kind of sea inspired or fish inspired. I hope, part of me thinks that might be good, because sometimes when someone's reading you think, get off stage, get out of here. So
not with this book.
Anyway, thank you also. I'll get on with it. This little vignette is called Judgment Run Down as Waters. Judgment run down as waters. In his histories, Herodotus recounts a failed alliance between Amasis II, pharaoh of Egypt, and Polycrates, tyrant king of Samos. As legend has it, Amasis, concerned by Polycrates' unnaturally good fortune, counseled the king against injuring the gods, jealous creatures that they are. Thus the pharaoh advised Polycrates to cast away the item he considered most precious, so that by his suffering, he might escape the otherwise certain ruin that awaited him. Seeing this advice to be good, Polycrates long considered that which he valued most. Eventually, the king ordered a 50-oared boat far out to sea, took an emerald-set signet ring from his finger, and hurled it into the chop. Returning to shore, the king grieved his loss. Several days later, a local fisherman landed an exceptionally large fish. After salting and wrapping the flesh in muslin, the fisherman slung the beast across his back, carried it through dust, banding heat. At the palace, he made an offering of the fish to Polycrates, who immediately ordered it to be prepared for table. It was then, in the bowels of the palace kitchen, the fish gutted by a scullion, that the signet ring was recovered, wet, gleaming, from within the fish's belly. Polycrates saw divine will in these events and wrote of his fortune to Amasis. But Amasis, seeing not divine will, but the tightening grip of fate, broke off an alliance with the king, who, as it turned out, would be murdered by a false ally, his body crucified and left to decay in the heat. In another version of this myth, so angered are the gods by Polycrates' offering, they return the ring as before in the stomach of a great fish, only to then take his son in a single night of illness, the boy suffocating as his lungs drowned in fluid. Created second only to light and darkness, its body divided to arc the heavens, water retains its celestial origins, the blue violence of unknowable knowledge, tides that mete out archaic Old Testament justice.
Wow, thank you.
That's it. Yeah, again, sorry it was so short. But,
the crowd goes wild.
Oh, no, it's all good. If you didn't like that, here's my hard sell of the book. A lot of the book isn't like that. There you go, fabulous, top selling point.
Well, that's an interesting thing about reading a couple of pages of this book, because it is so incredibly textured and it is so rich, right? So we have this like really fascinating kind of exploration, exposition of myth. There's all this exploration of myth and history and deeply researched, thoughtful places. And then there's, these meditations on self and your journey and travel and the body and illness and gender and healing and aqueousness and aquariums and personal histories and intellectual histories and mythologies, right? So there's cosmic elements and primal elements, and they're all really woven together. And I think woven almost isn't the metaphor. I find myself not wanting to, like, my brain wants to refuse anything but aqueous metaphors for this book because of how incredibly fluid and aqueous it is. Like, you bring all of these different layers of wateriness and aqueousness in so many, refracted through so many prisms. So there is this richness to it that can't be encapsulated in a single brief reading. So I encourage everyone to hold that and to keep that in mind and to know there's so many layers. We're going to try to touch on some of them here, but one of the things feels like that I wanted to kind of bring forward, and maybe we could start with, is the structure of the book. And so I want to talk about like the micro sentence level craft at some point, but also this is sort of the macro part of things, that this is such a beautifully structured book, and it does roam so far and wide into all of these different themes that I just mentioned and that we'll keep talking about. And yet it has this beautiful cohesion and flow together. And it's not framed as an essay collection, nor is it framed as a memoir, but as this single entity, one book length lyric essay, and the word lyric kind of pointing to it being sort of steeped in a poetics. And I'm wondering if maybe you could talk about how you came to that. Did you always know it would be a lyric essay, or what was it about that form that helped the book become what it needed to be?
So thanks, that's a really gorgeous question. It definitely I didn't have a premeditated notion of the books. So for those, obviously I imagine most people haven't read it, but it kind of has three threads. It has recurring sort of more self-contained essays that often weave personal anecdote with research. And then it has a threaded essay that runs right the way through about aquariums and my experience with transmasculinity, or my experience of embodiment more generally. And then these vignettes, one of which I read to you, which are usually always aquatic inspired and have some kind of bearing on what might follow. And the very last thing I did when I structured those was to color code them into those 3 sections, and then try and create a rhythm. So if anyone is nerdy enough to go through the rhythm of it, it does go to like an ABA or ABC, I forget now, because you you just sort of do it and you're like, oh, thank God it's done. But it goes from a short pattern, and then they elongate the spaces between the vignettes, actually elongates, and then it reaches like a crescendo point, and then it narrows down again. So it is like a wave going through it, was the idea. But I didn't have this premeditated notion of it being anything. Truth be told, lyric essay, anything at all. It was coming off the back of a year's writer's block, and Jakira, my wife, encouraged me to write. She's a bit more forceful than that. Told me to sit down and damn well write. And so I started writing small things. I'd never thought about writing anything personal or essayistic before. And I started writing bits, and then I allowed myself to research my favorite hobby horses or hobby fishes. That's how nerdy I am. I do puns like that.
It's research.
But
research is a happy place.
I do love it, yeah. And so things slowly emerged. I had all these masses of anecdotes or research bits, and then I started making these prose poem. I call them prose poem vignettes. I don't know if other people would, but that's how I see them.
Right.
And just slowly, the more it came together, and then the threaded aquariums essay was really the last one, because I got some editing feedback before, when it was still a very much an unfinished manuscript. There was some kind of essays there. Many of them were unfinished. Some of the essays in the book were wildly different. There's one in there called What Manner of Land, which has uses Santa Lucia in it. But before it used that, it used Saint Hubertus, who is this patron saint of hunting. And I got really interested into a union of butchers in Belgium who still celebrate him in the forest. I was trying to get Jakira to go, but she was like, I am not going to Belgium to see a load of butchers in a forest. Are you mad? And so anyway, I had to change, not because of Gia, I had to change that because it wasn't working with the essay, but I had these essays and I had the vignettes. And then the main editing feedback was, we like elements, but we don't see how it holds together. And I realized, and everyone kept saying, why are there fish? Like, what is with you? Why are there fish here? And I realized that I hadn't actually let the reader in on the significance of aquatic bodies for me, in terms of feeling permanently at disjoint or displaced from the body that I walk within. And how the aqueous had always been that kind of fluid, very mutable space that allowed me in some ways to breathe out and to feel more at ease in the limitations of incarnating, I think, or being bound in flesh. And so it was the very last essay to come together, this threaded one of aquariums and transmasculinity. And that was what finally held it together. It finally worked, but it was right up to, we're talking like the last month, 2 months before handing that over as a completed first draft to Graywolf. It really did take a lot, and I think a lot of it was reticence from me to write about transmasculinity sometimes, because I think any minority identity, you often get by a publishing industry asked to perform that identity or to and then I thought, no, I think maybe this is something I want to write about, and the book won't hold together unless I do. And I just thought, I just don't want to write about it in maybe the ways that the publishing industry has asked for previously, which is to say, like, deeply embodied or surgical, or a particular narrative transition. I wanted it to be something artful or strange, or that could stand on its just that could stand on its own, as that could be called essay. And as it came together, essentially, then I realized this really is one project. It's all together. And I think lyric essay just emerged as the form, rather than me thinking about it being the form beforehand, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, it sounds like it really did rise up from sort of what the book needed to be
Yeah.
and what it needed to say, which is amazing. And I'm just going to pause for 1 second to say props to Chiquita for sitting you down and saying you better write. Chiquita Diaz, your wife, who's also the author of an amazing book, Ordinary Girls, which is really phenomenal. And so go check it out. There she is in the chat. We got you, definite props. And so, because, and it does take that sometimes for us as writers, that kind of community or mirror or reflection, like, yes, keep with it. Yes, stay in the flow of the writing. So I think on some level, we all need that. And especially when we're writing for marginalized identities. And I'm hearing what you said about like the performativity that we can experience as a pressure from the publishing industry, from the literary world, from people who maybe don't share our marginalized identities. And I'm glad you found your way of writing in that felt real and authentic. And I do feel in this book, one of the things that's so unique about it, as I'm taking a dive in genderqueer and transmasculine literatures, is its kind of refusal to there's so many wonderful things and we need all the voices. But this particular book's sort of refusal to stay in the box or speak directly into a box, or to really kind of explore those layers of fluidity and complexity. And so much of this book is about, it's about transmasculinity, but as it is layered with the experience of having a body, with the experience of healing, with the experience of feeling, connected to nature and the primal, with the experience of the cosmic, there's so many different layers, the experience of being othered in so many different ways. Bodies being met with harshness or danger or erasure, like those things get refracted as well as the kind of what it means to swim, what it means to belong in the water. You have this line that I pulled out that sort of maybe speaks to that piece of like that relationship that you're weaving between fluidity and transmasculinity or genderqueerness, where you say, fish have always swum me beyond my body, exploded me into some other mythic imagined space, a state where I can breathe easier. And this is one of the many moments in this book that really took my breath away and just stopped me in my tracks. And I wanted to sort of tattoo it into my mind, And here it feels like the fluid world is like a portal to expansiveness. And it's sort of like an expansiveness that's so needed for so many of us whose genders overflow the limiting boxes of dominant social constructs. And I wondered, could you talk more about the connection between aqueousness, fluidity, bodies, queerness, and being, how that like lives for you in this work?
I'll do my best. I do just want to come back to what I said about sort of marginalized identities and trans narratives. And I think you said it in a better way when you said we need all the voices. And it's not that I don't like those transition narratives or anything like that. I just don't like it when a publishing industry only wants to publish a certain kind of narrative. I think that's it. But I think you said it much better than me.
Especially when it's a gatekeeper who is from outside that marginalized community who sort of pressures writers to do that. Right. But exactly, without discounting the incredible importance of those narratives and those books. We need them. We need so many books, right?
Yeah, exactly. Especially when there's only like very few getting published and you're like, no, we just need more is really what it is. We just need more. But in terms of aqueousness, what I have always tried to hold as a belief is that there's something that I think anyone can relate to, just being human. I don't think you have to be trans, I think you can be cis. I think you can even be very privileged, cis white het men. I think there's something about incarnating into a human body and its limitations. People struggle with it, whether it be how they look, whether it be weight or height or whatever it is for them. I think there's something that people can, a common ground, where it's just like, this is difficult at times and it feels somehow disjointed from maybe our notion of selfhood and how we actually understand ourselves. And then when that's refracted, and I think a lot of the times it might happen with age as well. But I think the beautiful thing about aqueousness is that you have this great genderless roving body that covers most of the world. And it is just beautiful, and it literally has depths, but it has it has this whole, it really is another world, that it turns everything on its head. Its species regularly switch gender, they move in shoals. You have these creatures that live at depths that people thought no life could inhabit. I think what it does for me, beyond just being slippery or amorphous or fluid, all the things that maybe could go with transness or genderqueerness, I think what it enables to do is radically upend all of the logics that go on dry land and that we tend to think of. You know, you have these migrating sharks that migrate by way of magnetic field, like they're not even sure how they travel these distances. And I think it just radically reframes and denaturalizes the world in a way that maybe sort of scripture can, or something very moving. I think they're all points into denaturalizing and having these kind of senses of epiphanies. And I think some of those epiphanies can come through science and oceanography and things. I like that. I like that about selfhood and aqueousness. There was something I was going to say and I've totally forgotten. I do this all the time at home and I need to get better on Zoom because I just suddenly have these blanks where I'm like, I was going to say something that I thought was important. But really that's what it is, I think, with the expansiveness of bodies. And I like anything that is strange and that counters what we believe to be normal. I like scripture, strange gods that do all kinds of things, grow heads, you know, dive into the underworld, emerge, duplicated. I like anything that radically rethinks what it is to be human. I'm interested in how we bind up humanness, even before gender. I'm interested in how we bind up humanness and the bounds that different societies and cultures want to put around just the fact of being human. And I find it very interesting how we like to separate ourselves from animals, which criteria we like to use, the criteria for consciousness as well. I'm probably way hippy dippy out there. Like, I think if I'm totally honest, I believe that even inanimate objects might have consciousness if we admit that there's a God. But that's way out there. Like that's just wild talk.
I mean, I wasn't going to talk about this, but you sparked an idea for me that one of my favorite essays that I teach a lot in literary translation graduate classes is called Two Languages in the Mind, but One in the Heart by Louise Erdrich, about relearning her native Ojibwe-Moan language, and how in the Ojibwe-Moan language, which is incredibly rich, all nouns are inflected as animate or inanimate. Just like in Spanish, it's like la mesa, it's inflected with gender, right? There's an inflection in the nouns as to whether they are animate or inanimate. And the word for stone in Ojibwe-Moan is animate. And so she writes in this incredible essay that, you know, when I am sitting inside of my Ojibwe-Moan language, I cannot hold a stone without being aware of its prescience, its animate presence, right? So who defines that is not the case? You know,
that's beautiful.
And I thought of that as you were speaking, and I think you, in your attention to nature and the possibilities of between nature and consciousness and mythological understanding and consciousness, I feel like you really give attention to those kinds of themes. Is another sentence that or phrase that I pulled out that I think also speaks to maybe this piece that you were talking about yes, absolutely, the experience of gender queerness as infinite and expansive, perhaps transmasculinity as infinite and expansive, but also humanness, and that these are things that can resonate for anyone who is really sitting with what it means to be fully human. You wrote, to live through the world, see oneself better in its rivers, lakes, cliffs, in the arc of migrating birds, schooling fish, to better grasp oneself in slow tides, waters eddying along darkened shoreline. Just amazing. That's not a question. I don't have a question about it.
So I get very shy. So I just go silent. One of my best friends is on this chat.
Is that right?
She goes, Lars is British. Yeah, Lars British. So Lars can't sell himself at all. Lars is just like, hi.
Okay, hi.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
I'm
that's
here
good.
to say, did you hear that effing sentence? I mean, my God, who doesn't want to sit in and swim in and live in that sentence, right? I mean, you just buy this book and it's full of sentences like that just open your cosmic understanding of being alive. So I wonder if we could circle back, if it's okay with you, to this thing about the lyric essay form, which is in some way, and I feel like you were touching on hybridity in talking about prose poem, right? Sort of the lyric and the essayistic together. And you may know this, but something I think about a lot is that in Spanish, we have the word género, and the word género has two meanings. It means gender, like it's our word for gender, but it also means genre. Like fiction is a género, poetry is a género, male is a género, female is a género. It's the same word. We use the same word. And so one of the things that Spanish activates for me, oh gosh, here I go talking about language again. I didn't know I was gonna do that, but but one of the things that Spanish activates for me is this kind of consciousness about gender categories and what happens when we, expand them, spill out from them, defy them, and also genre categories. And I often think of like prose poetry is almost like it's like a non-binary genre in a way, that it like holds in between. And I've just wondered whether you ever thought about the layering of sort of the queering of gender and the queering of genre in your work, like kind of like form mirroring content. Does that consciously happen for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I really think that you can make radical work in so many ways without necessarily referencing sort of minority identities or anything like that. I think that taking a radical stance to form, for instance, or genre is a really interesting way to do that, to do it through craft or to rupture the sentence. I think that those can be fascinating ways to like make a statement about all kinds of topics. I definitely would love to claim all hybrid work as trans in some way. I'll just as queer. Just we'll take that. Thank you.
You like that? That works. It resonates.
That's good. I'll have to have a few other people do it. Otherwise, I'll just come across like the British Museum stealing it again. But I really love that, and it's definitely something I feel most comfortable in is mixed media. In visual arts, it's always mixed media assemblage, and a lot of my visual arts training comes into how I write. So it's always a very tactile, very textural way of composing work, and I thought everyone did that until I talked to other writers, and they were like, "That's really odd," because I just like have a texture. I'm like, I need something really glassy here, and then I need something very tight and filigree like, and then I need something fleshy. And they're like, "That's weird," and I was like, "Well, that's how I do it. Like I go through." And then it's a kind of composition work or a curatorial work is how I build essays. And I build them very much often off the screen pages, very much into 3 dimensions spatially. Really? I often write spatially on the page before I my sentences are very mismatched and then they finally come together. So it's always in 3, or at least in spatial terms, that I put things together. And very visual, very textural. I sort of, as an essay starts to emerge, I might think, what's this kind of overall tone that I want? So I mentioned what manner of land is Santa Lucia, and I said this in a Q&A recently, that I just wanted the feeling of getting like something very like scripture, like an illuminated text or a Rembrandt or a Soutine, one of those kind of still lifes, and just dragging it through a mud bog and leaving it there. Like, what would an essay look like if you want that texture to come through? So that comes in. I think I can only work in mixed media, is the truth, because of how I tend to go through the visual arts before I come to language. I find the visual arts much more comfortable to be in and to inhabit. I find writing hard, really hard. I find it very hard. I think there's a lot of writers who always say they felt most comfortable with words and that's how they express themselves. And I think that if I'd gone for a much more healthy approach to my life, I might have gone into fine art, but instead here I am. And so it's
really hard for you.
It's really hard. I really struggle. I struggle a lot with it, and I think that's a fundamental part of my own approach to hybrid work, is that I tend to come from cinema or visual arts or sculpture, and then after that I'm just really interested in where the essay can go, because I think it suffers a lot from a certain whiteness and a very institutional, given where it came from, sort of the idea of academic institutions using the essay for so long, and how they're bound up in academic high register English, prose, narrative causality, explaining and exhibiting of points, but also the whiteness that comes with that, and the fact that truth status, when in essay terms, I think there are a lot of truths, cultural truths, that are allowed to be expressed as myth or in poetry, but they're not given the truth status of essay. And I'm thinking a lot of things like, why can't Natalie Diaz's post-colonial love poem, that whole book, be read as a long form essay, or Layli Long Soldier's Whereas?
Right.
I think a lot of, and so I'm interested in, like, I think this book starts a project, but one that I want to continue, which is putting the essay form under tension. And I think that hybrid work is a really interesting way of actually questioning and interrogating all these assumed norms of what it is to have an essay, and saying, no, I think we can have truth status, or be given to things that are existing in different forms, and have them brought into the essay form. And so I think I start that here, but it's still relatively traditional, a lot of it. But that is something that for my future work, I really want to lean into.
A place that you want to keep moving.
Yeah.
I think there's something very radical and beautiful about that. And kind of, it makes me think about authority, right? Which is who has the authority to be authoritative about speaking about something? And of course, the word authority has the word author in it. Like, what does it mean to own different layers of voices? Like you were saying, the sort of high register declarative essay. And that makes me think about what you're saying about research, how for you, research is such a rich part of writing at a happy place, and something that you really like. You bring rich veins of research into your work. And here you've got layered in histories of aquariums, of tattoos, like personal histories, but also mythologies. And that part, for me personally, really ignited me so much, because I am writing a novel right now that is a retelling of a Greek myth, a queering and retelling of a Greek myth. And it actually, I got chills, because you discuss in here a myth that I had just been writing about like 4 days before I read it. It was just incredible. Aphrodite and Eros with the fish, with the fish, and the fish.
They do such great things, those old gods. Terrible things as well, but I love it when they turn into animals. Love it.
Yes, they turn into animals, they turn into fish. And like, that was a myth that I had stumbled on pretty recently too. Like, there's such riches. So thinking about like all of these layers of research that you bring in and weave in, and how you kind of, really own centering those things alongside, the other meditations, alongside the personal, alongside these, gorgeous lyric cosmic moments like the ones I've sort of described and spoken to, and so much more. And I just was wondering, like, how do you know or decide when, because research, I know for me, when I'm researching for a novel, like I could dive and dive and dive. I could study the thing for 20 years, right? So how do you know or decide how much to include, when to keep layering in information, and when to move towards those detonating bursts of insight that I feel like in your essays, there's these moments where it's like facts and thoughts and truths and research material. And then there's this like detonations of light that break through the river of facts. How do you get that rhythm?
Oh, that's always a headache. I mean, I wish I could say it more eloquently, but it is, I love research, but I do go down, you just deep dive, and then you end up researching all the tributaries, if we're staying with these kind of metaphors. But I was recently researching, I spent 6 months researching watches, radium, and radiation, thinking I was going to write on this and it's for 6 months. And then I stood back and I went, this doesn't fit. So I had to take it all out. And you just do it. You just think, I think it's really that moment where you can maybe put something away, come back to it and say, that works or that doesn't. And sometimes it's hard. Like, I reread it 3 times thinking, no, I can make this fit. And then I thought, no, Lars, shut up, cut it out and just deal with it. So I think there's how I choose them is probably time. I think it's in the long duration of the work. In the short duration, I just try and research as much, and anything that really grabs me, I write down and I keep and I store. And sometimes it's helpful that in the long duration, you accumulate other strange facts. There's a very short piece in here that links an arm reliquary where priests would anoint a parish with this silver arm reliquary. And then I put that next to an Australian crime case where a dead man's arm, a severed arm, was found in the belly of a shark that coughed it up in an aquarium. And I kind of parallel the two and then try and join them. And that is literally just because that arm reliquary had been floating around in my mind for years. I think I went to an exhibition where that was maybe 10 years ago, and I'd just been struck by it. And then I found out about the case, and then I slowly thought maybe these could go together. So I mean, when I talk about the long duration of the work, it could be a decade. But I think that coming to those moments of crystallization where things, having just the faith that time will tell out and you'll find those elements that come together is one thing. And then also just having the guts to cut them when they don't. But when I came to editing for the final draft for Graywolf, I cut 30,000 words of 80,000.
Wow.
So that, yeah.
So did it land then at about 50,000, or did you add more words in that?
No, it landed at 50.
Okay. Yeah. That'll happen. That sounds like writing.
Yeah, and I think if and I tell people it'll be better for it. Just
it'll be better for it.
And I think that's one gift I have, is that I don't mind just hacking out. I might be terrible at many other things, and I am really bad at plenty of stuff, but I don't mind just taking the garden shears to a manuscript.
Yeah, that's amazing. You've sort of embraced and accepted that is part of the process. I don't know, working from textures and visual arts helps with that, or you just have it in you to be able to do that without too much pain or self-doubt or what have you. I mean, that's a great thing to have as a writer. Yeah, I used to call the place, like the file where I would cut paragraphs or sentences, like, okay, this isn't working anymore, I would cut them and put them in a file. I used to call it the graveyard, but that was very morbid, like, like there's like bones sticking out, of unusable paragraphs and sentences and pages. And then I switched metaphors at some point. So I was like, oh, I don't actually need to subscribe to this like sort of violent kill your darlings metaphor if I don't want to. And I call it the compost. And I bring that up. Yeah, it's the compost. I bring that up because you say garden shears. You're not afraid to use the garden shears. And it's like you take all those branches, you put them in the compost. But what happens with compost? It actually decomposes and nourishes the soil, nourishes new life. Like it becomes something else. And I feel like, who knows what those 30,000 words, they might just go into the soil, but there might be in their seeds for future work for you.
Yeah, I'd never thought about whether it was coming from visual arts that made it easier for me, but you're totally right. Yeah. I don't think of writing as scary when you cut, because you can easily save and copy. You can copy a whole Word document and have it there, the old version, forever. Yeah. Whereas in visual arts, if you need to reduce a work, or you need to, there's only one. And when you make that cut or you make that change, it sticks. And if it doesn't work out, you're done. Like it doesn't work out. You've only got the one copy, whether it be painting, whether it be sculpture, whether it be, it's ruined. And so I don't find cutting in Word documents scary. I find it in visual arts, I've often taken a deep breath and said a prayer.
Right, I bet. So there is that connection. I was just kind of thinking out loud. I wonder if
I'd never made
from the visual arts is part of why you have this superpower of not being scared of it. Not all writers have that superpower. We just deal with it, So that's great. You get to bring that superpower from the other genre, from the other género, right? I'm going to ask you one more question of the many that I would love to ask you. I'm going to pick one, and then we're going to move to if you have a brief last question, and then we're going to move into welcoming questions from the chat. So feel free to drop them in there. the title, I love the title. It's immediately gripping, Voice of the Fish. And then as I was reading, I just felt like I kept getting more and more layers to the, like, okay, there's going to be a lot of fish. This is going to be an aqueous book. And then there was so much that came forward for me, including I kept thinking about how we landlubber humans tend to experience fish as silent. Right? We experience fish as silent, which gives the title a kind of tension of impossibility. What is the voice of the fish? How does a fish have a voice? Or maybe it's a tension of triumph because the fish is speaking. So depending on how you look at it, there just seems to be a kind of dance between like fish and silence and what it means to have a voice. And I wonder how you came to the title. Can you tell us a little about that, or about how you experience the tension between silence and voice in this?
Yeah, absolutely. And the title, I came to it very pragmatically. I opened the book with a vignette which kind of acts like a prologue, recounting how in the 1600s a manuscript, a treatise, a religious treatise, was found, so the story goes, in the belly of a codfish in the Cambridge fish market. And Dr. Mead of Christ College, Cambridge, was just dandying through the fish market on that day and saw this manuscript in the codfish in the fish market, retrieved it, and they attributed the writings to, I think it was John Firth, who was actually kind of strangely imprisoned in a fish cellar before he was burnt at the stake. And it's believed that the manuscript, if you subscribe to the tale, that he flung it into the water, codfish ate it, and then swam hundreds of miles upshore, where it was caught and gutted, and the manuscript was retrieved.
Wow.
You know, and it was called the bookfish, or vox piscibus in Latin, which literally translates to voice of the fish, but then it was translated into English as the bookfish. So I took its literal translation. And I think because I was really interested in this idea of things being retrieved from the bellies of animals. There was something very biblical about it, but also I was just interested in like this bodies inhabiting bodies, bodies within bodies, how animals can bring us nearer to the truth of ourselves. So I went with that tension more, was the reasoning, but that was the pragmatic sort of how I came to the title. And then I liked how you said we assume fish to be silent, because of course they're so loud, actually. They're rowdy. They've recently found out that they have a dawn chorus. Many fish have a dawn chorus. Wow. Like scientists put microphones and fish are there making these clicks and blips and, you know, welcoming the sunlight. So right. I think that's an interesting one. But yeah, the silence, there's a lot about silence in the book. Obviously there was a period where I had a really bad burnout and a breakdown, and I was silent for a short while, and then the lack of reading and writing lasted a lot longer, and the silence was a bit shorter than that. But there was physical silence, but I think that there's also a lot of silence in the work, perhaps because I think anyone who knows me knows I'm quite chatty, but I think in terms of really sitting with the truth of myself, be that sexuality or gender, coming to that, being open enough about that with people, I think there's a great amount of silence in myself, where I don't speak what I truthfully feel. I'm very chatty day to day and at home, but I think actually sitting in that quiet, I love silence and I love quiet, and I think it's because I often feel compelled to just be the chatty upbeat one. Like I like to be that, but I think that really this book allowed me to speak a lot of things that I don't normally say. And I think that I often stay silent about how I truly feel and about what is really going on at a deeper level with me. And I think I hide that not hide it, I don't think it's as conscious as that, but I think that I keep that very buried from family, from friends, and it's not from them, but I think that I finally actually gave voice to things that I have found emotionally very challenging. And so I think there was this tension all the while that I didn't realize between silence and voice. that I haven't actually articulated, and that maybe the only way I ever manage to do that is on the page a lot of the time. Because otherwise I'm too busy just joking around, being a bit of a tosser really in the day-to-day. But I think that the page allows me a certain space where I don't have to take into account a situation or other people's needs and feelings.
Yes.
Because I think I'm very aware of what other people might need from me. And I think that that space of the page allows me to just take the time and the quiet for myself to actually think, what do I want to come and say? And what have I not been saying?
Right.
Because I haven't, And also you can't just blurt out these sentences about feeling like a tide in the middle of going to say, like doing your shopping, can you? You can't just say to someone, by the way, I feel like a tide. Like,
everyone.
What's up with you? Like, what is wrong with you?
Have you been? If I am a river, exactly. Like, because it's that deeper, it's the voice under the quiet. I mean, that's sort of the beautiful paradox of writing, right? Is that, we go quiet, we go deep into a deep place of silence or focus, and then underneath we find these voicings that are sort of made possible by the silence, right? The dawn chorus of the fish that was actually there all along, right? So I mean, that's a beautiful thing, that those voices of fish that have not always been heard or known can be known more deeply on the page. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amazing. So we have a question from Jen Choi. I love what you said about textures. For example, wanting to include or pivot to sections that had filigree. Agreed. That was amazing. Almost like a synesthete sensibility. What makes a piece of writing have filigree? Or how do you determine these textural differences?
Okay, nice question. Hi, Jen.
Really good question.
So I think it depends from piece to piece and maybe how I'm interpreting those textures at the time. But I think of filigree as very tight and very ornate. So it will often have a very rigid grammar structure, very traditional, but also very tight and polished, not very rambling. And then I might even allow myself some rather la-di-da language, few esoteric words, bit of like whom, and I think that's when I often think of it as like tight research work as well. And I think it basically gets adopted when I think of a texture. I try and let it infuse through all of them, so that
you were frozen for just 1 second, but you're back.
Where did I cut?
It was just a moment. I think just keep going.
No worries. I was just saying it to let that kind of texture go through the vocabulary, the grammar, the syntax, and the actual subject matter itself. So that would be like what I would consider filigree. Like particularly if you've managed to find an anecdote about Renaissance Florence, I feel like that's high filigree. And then something much more earthy. I'll often think of earthy or dirty. I quite often like something like if you could put lace, like bone lace over meat. So then I think of something very fleshy being, say, if you have contemporary artwork that uses decomposing elements. And that could be, I'm thinking particularly of Hirst's when he put a pig's head in a glass vitrine with flies and then a fly killing bulb element. So they would feast on the head, and then I think it was a pig's head, I might be wrong, it could be a sheep's head, and then they would die. So it's like a cycle of life within this glass vitrine. And I think of that as fleshy, but it could be anything. It could be something that's very, so that's how I tend to do it. And I'll allow myself more sentence level malleability perhaps, or more visceral language. And that's how I tend to work with texture. So I try and have it at every level of the sentence and paragraph. And then I do try and choose it by subject matter as well.
Excellent. Wow, that was such a great answer. I just absolutely loved hearing about the filigree and the textures. Thank you so much for that question, Jen. I'm going to be carrying that with me. And then we have a question from an anonymous audience member. What work does the speaking voice do to help stitch the essay's 3 strands together?
I hope I'm right in interpreting this, and I'm sorry if I'm not. I'm guessing the speaking voice might be the I voice, the personal, what I tend to call personal anecdote throughout. I think that the threaded aquarium essay is the one that's doing most of the work to stitch this book together. And in that, the I voice is probably more open, more emotionally open as well than all the other pieces. I directly talk about how as a child, I genuinely believed my body was full of fish. Like I thought that was, I would draw these anatomy views where there were just fish all through my body. And I believed that was what it looked like. And then I talk about how as I became more defamiliarized with my body and it just felt like it didn't fit, I always wondered if the fish had left. And so I take that as my catalyst, and I move through talking about how do you write about a body that's fundamentally displaced from your sense of self, or how I feel like my body is a separate entity from who I am. Like I talk to it like there's two of us. And I think the essay, the I voice does a lot in that threaded essay to talk openly about these subjects in a way that does demand effort from the reader to then take that discourse and map it onto the rest of the book. So the vignettes, I don't think there's an I voice at all in them, if I remember correctly. They're very much research heavy and they're very curatorial. The work is curatorial, these juxtapositions. And then the I voice in the other essays is usually talking about themes within those essays, like going to see a Belgian breeder of fighting cockles to get your foot healed. Go do it, works.
Yeah.
That
foot healing, that was amazing. That was amazing. What an amazing story. It was an amazing story. I feel like if I wrote that, if anyone wrote that in fiction, it would be like, that's a little ham-fisted, you know, that's just a little much. And we get torn apart in a fiction workshop. But no, this is real. This really happened. It's incredible.
Yeah, fact is way weirder than fiction. I've always said that. I can't write fiction because I like things that are too strange. And so to come back to that question, the I voice in those two other strands is not really, I don't think, doing the work. To be honest, I think the reader is doing the work to link them. I think the main work by the I voice is being done in that threaded essay, but I think beyond that, there has to be a certain willingness on the part of the reader to make the connections between the other two threads. So I hope that answers the question to an extent.
It's great. Yeah, there's sort of cohesion and also like this braiding of different voices at the same time. It works really beautifully. And we just have so many appreciations in the chat. I agree with Keith Wilson out there saying a bit of whom. I love that. I also thought of it as like seasoning, like when you're cooking, you know, like you got your oregano, you're gonna like put in some whom, because this is a filigree kind of situation.
Yeah.
Down. You know?
MFK Fisher has a good bit of filigree, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
there's
good.
a certain amount of like, she makes it look effortless, but there's a good bit of oldie ye old English in there that I'm always like, damn, girl. Yeah,
there she goes. There it is. Yeah. It's so powerful to make that visible and conscious. It's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I think we're going to see Peter again from City Lights
emerge,
wrap up. But this has been so incredible. I have just gotten so much out of this conversation with you, Lars, and thank you for everything you shared with us this evening, and thank you for writing this incredible book.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Peter, and thank you everyone for coming. I really mean that really sincerely. It's so generous and kind of everyone to take the time and to be so enthusiastic. My heart goes out to you all.
There were so many great anecdotes and ideas tonight, and to be able to kind of like enter into your creative process, it was such a treat and really an honor to have you both grace our virtual halls. Lars Horn, congratulations. We're really looking forward to seeing more. I wish there were like kind of a Lars Horn, Carolina De Robertis channel in an alternate universe that we could just sort of flip on at any hour of the day and we could just like hear this. This is really such a pleasure. And Carolina, you were really such a great interviewer and keeping it going and the pacing and everything. Really appreciate it. Big shout out to Graywolf and all the wonderful work that they do, man. They're just producing some of the most amazing stuff, and support them. They're such a great indie, just year after year. I mean, it's been a pleasure working with them. I also want to thank Claudia, who worked on this event. Really appreciate your efforts, and all the editors and everyone there. Just love them. So, and finally, thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us and being so enthusiastic. And as always, completing the circle. Tonight's event was made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through public events like this one, a publishing program, and educational outreach, all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So be safe, be well, everyone. We hope to see you all again very soon.